Look what we got here. Looks like we're doing a little work on the van.
What have you been up to?
I've been riding on a daydream.
So what have you replaced so far, bud?
The oleander, the belt, driving belt, spark plugs, spark plug wires, the distributor cap, the rotor, the one gasket on this side for the
Valve cover.
yeah, valve cover.
Yeah, you got a lot of new parts on here.
Yeah. Hopefully it doesn't fail.
Oh, you took it for a drive yesterday.
Yeah. You're slinging oil. That's why I'm doing this.
Are you putting it back together now, or?
No, I'm taking this off.
Oh, you had to replace the other valve cover.
Yep.
That sounds like fun.
Well, we gotta take off the whole.
Is this your first time doing automotive repairs? Wow, that's awesome. I work at an auto parts store, and I never did nothing like this. Of course, I did sell parts. So what do you think about it so far?
Not much different from a computer.
You just gotta pay attention, huh?
Yeah. Or a bike, really.
That's true.
Just with more tubes and wires.
Yeah.
Electricity.
Oh, how many times you do that?
Sometimes.
Okay, well, I'll leave you alone so you can finish up.
So you can see what I'm doing. We've had people that comment, your son don't do nothing, he just sits there and plays on the phone. Well, you can see. This is me supervising. But he's going to change the fuel filter yet, and he's already done all that work he just said. Idle air control valve, new serpentine belt, and he's just getting it ready. I mean, it had the original spark plug wires on it from 1988. They were in very good condition, and the reason I know they're original is because they were put perfectly like the factory would in the brackets that hold the wires away from everything, and they're almost impossible to get to without doing it as the engine's being assembled. So he's in really good shape as far as getting the mechanics of the thing done. We still have to again do the fuel filter and do an oil change, and we got to pull off the upper intake. That's what he's doing right now. He's pulling the throttle body off, and we're going to pull the upper intake so he can replace his other valve cover on the other side because it's bad. They're leaking down the back. We took it for a drive after we adjusted the throttle valve cable going through the transmission. I know basically where it needs to be to have the right tension for a nice part throttle shift, and his thing always shifted early, so I reset it to where it shifted, a little bit later, and we drove down the street without that doghouse on, and when we got back, there was oil on our legs, there was some oil inside the van, and it was just coming out the valve covers, and because of the wind, that was coming through there, we knew that needed fixed. So one more valve cover, and then we'll go ahead and jump into the van, build a little bit more in the back. All right, so I had to give Lindy a hand. He did all the work. I just had to reach in and grab a couple places, but you can see what's kind of needed. If you guys are going to be out on the road traveling, you got to be able to either do this yourself or have enough money in your pocket to pay somebody else to do it. I mean, this is something as simple as just his valve cover bolts were loose, and the valve cover gaskets were shot, and it's been leaking. You see it coming down the engine there, and the other side's even worse. Not only that, but he's losing engine vacuum because it's sucking air around these valve covers for the most part if the oil's not coming out. So yeah, you got the intake off. This is tight quarters. This is one of the benefits of having a van that's older. You can work on everything. However, one of the disadvantages of any van is they're usually harder to get to everything. So we're moving along here.
What are you doing there?
I'm scraping the inside of this pan. So that's pretty good.
Was it real bad?
Not as bad as the other one, actually.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so
Gonna have like a new vehicle here soon.
hopefully.
What's that?
Hopefully. All right, so you've seen the engine work that was being performed on the van, continuing into this series. And now he's working on finishing up the cabinets to some extent. What he's got going on here is the ability to mount this sink. Now this sink was originally with the van, and he wants to utilize it because there's nothing wrong with it. And our pop-up camper we had years ago, I have this hand pump faucet that'll work in here. So what he's doing is trying to build a countertop that he can mount this sink on, and basically make a cabinet then that he can access these two water jugs from, you know, the outside, to make it where it's easier for him to just pull them out and, you know, go fill them. All right, so we've got an idea of the cabinet and what we want it to look like here. You can see there's a little bit of, well, we're not cabinet makers, but we're going to make it to where it's solid. We'll come back when we're a little bit closer to that. I don't know if we're going to get it done today because it's starting to get a little darker. All right, so my son worked on the van until later in the day, and looks like he's got quite a bit of this stuff going pretty darn well here. See, he screwed around and looks like he's moved around. Oh, that's right, he went somewhere last night. So some of the things that we've done is he removed the table that used to be here. He doesn't think that he's going to utilize it that much, and it was interfering with what we were trying to get accomplished here. He could mount it over here. He's thinking about it. We're not sure if he's going to do that. It's up to him. I mean, he's got a lot of choices here. This tower, of course, we're going to secure. But you can see basically his sink situation. He's going to paint this countertop with some sort of a coating after he does some filler for the screws here. But pretty darn solid. It's turned out really well. What we're going to do now is go ahead and bore a hole here and just put a hose with a clamp in through here to a closed up 5-gallon bucket that's going to allow him to, you know, drain it as he needs. We talked about putting the drain here and his water jugs in there, but it's going to be easier for him to water jugs in and out here. And, you know, the 5-gallon bucket, not a big deal. It fits in that slot a little bit better. Now, this is where there's a lot of controversy whenever you're building a van. And, you know, you know, my son has his ideas about it. I have my ideas about it. And that is, do you put an external drain that goes to the ground from your sink? I mean, that's what it comes down to. Do you want to drain whatever comes out of your sink, whatever you put in your sink, do you want to have the ability for it to drain straight to the ground? And that's a tough call. There's certain places that allow gray water to be dispersed onto the ground. However, most places require it to be dispersed underground somehow. So if there's a storm drain or something like that, the gray water could go into the storm drain. I mean, it comes down to what I believe is just common courtesy. I mean, how do you guys feel about that? If I was to have some hand sanitizer or some sort of a pump hand cleaner, and you saw me at Walmart's parking lot, and I stepped outside of my car, let's say I just drove a car, I stepped outside of my car, you see me put some hand soap, and I did this, and I took a bottle of water, and I poured it over my hands, rinsed them off, and just kind of slung them out. Is that an issue? So why would it make a difference if I'm, doing it inside my RV and it's pumping out on the ground? It's a tough call, because I think people have a stigma about seeing something that's draining out of a vehicle and not knowing exactly where it comes from. I mean, the first thing that probably pops into people's head is, oh man, that guy's draining his toilet water on the ground or something. And I'm not going to say that doesn't happen. I used to work in the trucking industry, and I heard numerous stories from my drivers about people taking their pee jugs and just leaving them in parking lots, or emptying their pee jugs in parking lots, and even in storm drains and stuff. It's just the way some people are, and some people don't have a problem with it. Other people do. I mean, again, that's a judgment call. So in his case, he's very conscious about the environment and what happens. One of the main reasons he wanted to replace the valve cover gaskets on his van, other than occasionally he could smell some oil, and me telling him also that having a leaky valve cover causes, other problems down the road. And of course, him using oil, one of his main concerns was he didn't like the fact that he was, polluting the environment with oil dripping off his vehicle. So whenever I talked about maybe putting a hole in the bottom of his van for a drain, or to make it to where he could have, pull the hose out of the 5-gallon bucket and for it to drain out the door, maybe when he's sitting somewhere, he had mixed feelings about it. He didn't know if he wanted to do that or not. I also talked about maybe making that 5-gallon bucket have a drain on it to where he could just drain it directly out of his van if he was somewhere. But this is one of the things I expect you guys to comment on, how you feel. If you're parked out in the middle of a field, if you were parked in my yard, for example, I have drainage that goes into a ditch, and that ditch goes down to a lake. If somebody was to say, hey, listen, is it okay if I just let my gray water tank run in your yard? I wouldn't have a problem with it as long as it's away from everything. But technically, in this state, in this area, for this county, gray water is not to be dispersed on top of the ground. It's supposed to be dispersed in a pipe that then goes somewhere else. I know that seems strange, but that's just the way it is. So I'll leave it up to you guys in the comments. I'm not going to really jump in on that. I'll let you guys talk about it all you want and tell me what you think's right. Now, the whole reason that we're working so hard with the water part of it and the storage of the water is because we had talked about going to the sugar beet harvest. And when we spoke with the representative that does all the hiring for the sugar beet harvest, I mentioned something at the time. Of course, we're going back a few years. I had my older truck and my older RV, and I wanted to know if my son came with me, if he could bring his van. And I would park my truck somewhere else. I would park it off-site. I'd park it in the parking lot. I'd park it in overflow parking, whatever. But then he would park his van on the site with my RV, with our old RV. And they said if they find him sleeping in the van, it's going to be an issue. Which I thought was kind of odd myself. But they said it was going to be an issue if they found him sleeping in the van. And I said, well, what about him having a separate campsite? And they said, if you were to put him in a separate campsite, they wanted 2 campers per site. And not only that, but for this to be classified as a camper, it had to have a toilet, had to have a place to hold food, refrigerated food, had to have water, had to have a holding tank. Well, that's what we're doing. That 5-gallon bucket, sure, it's a small holding tank, nonetheless, it's a holding tank. And maybe we'll put a big holding tank on this. Maybe I'll put something underneath his van one day. That's on down the road, and I'm not in any rush, and neither is he. So if that day comes, great. If it don't, okay. But this is why we're working on it so hard. So we can say, yes, it's fully self-contained. There is a dedicated bed. There is, a toilet that he can use. There is a sink. There is fresh water. There is a holding tank for that water. And of course, he's got a real nice refrigerator freezer here. So that's going to be the build so far today. We're going to let him work on a little bit more, and we'll see what we come up with. All right, so we're the next day, and we got some parts in from UPS. The main thing is these quick disconnect fittings. Now, we had to do some trimming of the plastic and get creative with the way that they seal off here, but we got to utilize the lid. And what this is going to allow him to do is just switch this lid from this jug to this jug, and basically this is a bulkhead, so it's all sealed off. You can see here there's an O-ring in there because the rubber ring just didn't want to stretch even though I tried to make it stretch. What we'll do is we'll get a 1/2-inch hose here that connects to this barb and just goes down inside the tank. So whenever we put the lid back on and that hose is down in there, which of course it isn't right now, no water will come out until this fitting, which has a hose barb on it, that'll be connected to the sink underneath here. You can see this old doctored up thing I got going on there. Whenever this fitting is engaged like that, now it's free and open. The nice thing is for transporting to get water and not disconnecting the whole hose system, he'll just disconnect this quick disconnect, and it'll just hang off of the sink, and it seals itself off, so whatever water's in the hose or in the faucet doesn't come running out. It doesn't have any kind of way for it to come out, so that's nice. I mean, that'll work out really good. So working on the wastewater, we have to drill a hole in the side of the cabinet for the drain to go through, and we've got a jug, a clear jug, that will allow him to see his wastewater. What we'll do with this is we'll make a connection here somehow for the hose. I haven't figured that out quite yet, but we'll figure out something for the drain to go into here. Now the links will be down below for this stuff, obviously. This one was about $13. Those fittings are expensive. Those two fittings were $40. However, they're the best that they have. You don't have to worry about them failing or leaking for the most part. So yeah, we got to figure out something with the jug. In the meantime, he's going to be putting in a shelf here. You can see this shelf is pretty much sanded down and smooth and ready to be treated and mounted. But this board here will be the shelf that he's going to most likely be putting totes on for clothes or whatever. I mean, there's quite a few things that he's got to decide about that. And there's still going to be plenty of room underneath for even more. So we'll let him get back to work, and I'll try to figure out that jug.